Data versus doubt, progress versus politics is the last episode of the series here on BBC Two. It's Big Oil versus the world.
What do you do when you learn the product you make threatens the entire planet?
ExxonMobil provides an essential component of modern society: affordable, reliable, and abundant energy.
They were actually making eerily accurate predictions about how high the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere would be.
There are massive fracking booms happening in Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania.
ExxonMobil is making a bet here on natural gas.
America is at the beginning of a great natural gas boom.
Did it turn out we had it wrong? Absolutely. What we learned about methane emissions is very, very scary.
Methane is harming every single person and every animal and everything on this planet.
Global warming, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
They knew that eventually policymakers were going to catch up and take actions that would put their business in jeopardy. So what do? Delay, distract, and deflect.
I certainly didn't grow up questioning fossil fuels or thinking about where energy came from. It was just 1950s USA. Everything was automatic and wonderful.
Soon, traffic will flow smoothly in, around, and between every major city and town in America.
Fossil fuels were driving what we call Western civilization. And still today, I value what fossil fuels have done for the world.
This is the road to prosperity.
I was proud to be working years later in the oil and gas industry. But we each have to make our own decisions, decide what to do with our lives. And when you change course, you change course.
Four decades ago, a young engineer called Tony Ingraffia joined a government task force searching for ways to access new sources of oil and gas.
It was being driven partly by this patriotic fervor. We don't want to be beholden to the Middle East. Right? U.S. oil production and natural gas production had just fallen off, right off the end of the table. We're going to work really hard to make sure that the U.S. always has its own supply of fossil fuels. What's not to like?
Their search led them to shale rock.
Even in this small piece of Marcellus Shale, there is stored methane, which becomes natural gas when it's produced. And if one were to estimate the total amount of methane, thousands of square miles under all these states, it's many, many trillions of cubic feet of natural gas.
But nobody had thought about spending a lot of money trying to get oil and gas out of shale. And most people in the industry, the vast majority of the people in the industry, said it couldn't be done. We did a lot of computer modeling and concluded that it was certainly possible.
After years of further research, the industry perfected a method of fracturing rock and horizontal drilling. Fracking.
People realized then that there was this enormous untapped resource. We've unlocked the keys to the kingdom.
Once fracking became cost-effective, Wall Street took note.
Most people in the oil and gas industry, most reporters like myself that were covering it, thought that oil and gas in the United States was over. We had found all the good reserves, we had drilled all the big wells, and shale changed all that. It was unexpected, it was dramatic, and it was lubricated by billions and billions of dollars coming out of Wall Street.
Thanks to record-breaking U.S. production, natural gas will continue to be a bargain. At Chesapeake Energy, we explore for American natural gas.
The leader of the fracking boom was Chesapeake Energy's Aubrey McClendon.
Aubrey McClendon was a great visionary. He was one of the best natural speakers I'd ever seen.
CEO of Chesapeake Energy, we welcome you, Mr. McClendon. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's one message I'd like to effectively communicate today, it's that America is at the beginning of a great natural gas boom. And this boom can largely...
He believed that natural gas was the fuel of the future, and he called it that all the time.
For clean electricity, natural gas is the answer. Just remember, pollution is no bargain, natural gas is.
At the time, most of the world's power was generated by coal, which was sending greenhouse gas emissions to record levels. McClendon argued that gas was better for the planet because it released less CO2.
He said, well, what do you think? He said, do we need an association or an organization just focused on the gas opportunities out there? So we started the Clean Skies Foundation. It was just doing everything we possibly could to get out the message.
What if America had its own clean energy? Abundant and available for the next century or more, and possibly indefinitely.
The fossil fuel industry tries to make this argument that we can be part of the solution. We can be a force for good on climate, that we'll go out and we'll drill the natural gas, which is going to help us lower our emissions.
Doing a world of good for our economy, energy security, and our irreplaceable planet Earth.
And then all of a sudden, Aubrey McClendon, he starts courting probably the most prominent environmentalist in the country, Carl Pope, at the Sierra Club.
And we have Carl Pope, the executive director of the Sierra Club, who is a giant in the environmental movement.
Aubrey McClendon's Chesapeake Energy secretly donated $26 million to the Sierra Club, America's most influential environmental organization.
Well, we were working with Chesapeake to kill coal, and they were providing us with financial support. The concept that we were trying to convey was to say, eventually we have to be off all fossil fuels, but we have to get off coal first, oil second, and gas third. So we have the opportunity to replace a very dirty fossil fuel coal with a much cleaner fossil fuel natural gas for the next 20 or 30 years.
The gas industry had gained a powerful friend in the environmental movement. It was an alliance Carl Pope would later come to regret.
The natural gas industry, the gas industry, but they've trained me to call it the natural gas industry. Nothing natural about it. I didn't understand how strong they were. I thought the big player was oil. I thought gas was kind of a junior cousin. Gas turns out to have an awful lot of political strength. And Americans had been more fully sold on the myth that gas was green. And I didn't realize how deeply that had sunk into people's brains, and probably mine.
Several other major environmental organizations went on to back natural gas expansion. Aubrey McClendon would die in a car accident in 2016. But by then, his campaign to sell gas as a climate solution had changed the world.
It's sort of amazing that there was this guy in Oklahoma City who helped really shift the whole national dialogue about climate and about fossil fuels. And just at a time when a lot of scientists were sort of looking at this and saying, we really need to start weaning off fossil fuels. And in doing so, he locks in the United States onto natural gas for the next generation.
There are massive fracking booms happening in Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania. It's much of the middle of this country.
It's led to unprecedented expansion in towns from Cotulla to Beeville.
The oil fields fueling a red-hot energy boom.
Tens of thousands of fracked wells were now appearing across America and the world. The boom attracted the interest of one of the world's largest oil companies.
X certainly marks the spot. ExxonMobil announcing it is buying XTO Energy, and it's a $41 billion deal, including some...
ExxonMobil is making a bet here on natural gas.
Overnight, ExxonMobil became America's largest gas producer. Da Long Chang was an ExxonMobil engineer who worked on the company's fracking operations.
My peers, when they were recruiting me, they knew my concerns about climate change. They told me that ExxonMobil was the largest non-state energy company in the world. And even though oil and gas had been its bread and butter, ExxonMobil was going to be part of the energy transition over my career. And I believed them. They talked about the excitement of having gas be a bridge fuel to the future of energy.
I think one of the biggest challenges that the world is facing today is to develop all the energy we need in an environmentally friendly way.
The fact that natural gas was much cleaner burning than coal, that it produced half the carbon dioxide emissions of coal, those are very appealing to me.
But Chang also knew there was a major problem with gas if it's allowed to leak.
Natural gas is primarily methane, and methane, when it's leaked out into the atmosphere, can have orders of magnitude more global warming impact than carbon dioxide. Methane gas can have an impact of more than 80 times the impact of carbon dioxide. But the reason why this is so important is because we only have a couple of decades to avert runaway climate change.
Chang worried that the tens of thousands of new fracking operations across the globe could be leaking massive amounts of methane, turbocharging the climate crisis.
It's commonly known among engineers that all gases leak, and that if you don't take measures to check for leaks, and if you don't take measures to prevent those leaks, then the assumption is that you're guilty until proven innocent. RA felt that having many unconventional methane gas wells was a ticking time bomb for methane gas leaks. The more engineering infrastructure, the more wells and the more pipes, the more potential there is for leakage. When they were marketing natural gas as clean energy, they were fixated on the idea that natural gas, when burned, produces half the carbon dioxide emissions of coal. But without measurement devices to verify that you're not significantly leaking, you can't be sure that your natural gas is actually giving you less of a global warming impact than coal. There wasn't much appetite for management to measure methane leakage because if they found out there was a problem, they would have to do something about it.
At the time, ExxonMobil and others in the industry said they were working to reduce methane emissions. But on the ground, some in the environmental community were documenting widespread leaks.
I am hunting for methane that is escaping from oil and gas facilities because that's what I do. I'm a methane hunter.
Sharon Wilson worked at an environmental watchdog group investigating methane emissions.
This is an optical gas imaging camera, and it makes the invisible methane and volatile organic compounds from oil and gas facilities, it makes those visible. All of these pieces of equipment have got leaks. There's a lot of methane going off the flare. This is just a really, really dirty site.
These emissions, what's coming out of oil and gas sites, the fact that it's invisible has helped them be able to expand and help them maintain that narrative of being clean, and when that is not the case.
The tanks are venting.
It started with local concerns, but then when I realized what a powerful actor methane is, I realized that it's a global problem.
We need to move about where that telephone pole is.
It was hard to imagine at first how much gas is releasing from these sites, from everywhere, and how many ways that they release gas, all the way from the drilling all the way until it ends up at a power plant.
She kept sending her findings to regulators and the press.
It's just disbelief that you can show someone video after video, proof after proof after proof, and they still do nothing. I sure can't compete with the oil and gas industry PR budget that they use to pump propaganda at us.
Wilson gathered evidence from hundreds of sites, including some operated by ExxonMobil. In a statement, ExxonMobil said it's been an industry leader in the effort to reduce methane emissions and has been using advanced technology to detect leaks.
What is happening in the United States, particularly in Texas, it's affecting people all around the globe because methane is harming every single person and every animal and everything on this planet.
As Sharon Wilson was sounding the alarm, a growing number of engineers and scientists were waking up to the dangers of methane leaks, including the man who'd helped pioneer the process of fracking.
I became very much more concerned about climate change when I realized what shale gas and oil was going to unleash. That's the right word, unleash. This is trite. Unleash a tsunami of oil and gas. Yes, that's what it did. That's when I started feeling contradictory regret and pride. Pride that we had done good engineering work to help somebody eventually figure out how to do it. Regret that we had helped somebody figure out how to do it.
By now, Tony Ingraffia was a civil engineering professor at Cornell University and had spent years advising oil and gas companies. In 2011, he and colleagues published a critical report on the climate impact of fracking.
We spent 2 years doing the research, published a paper in a prestigious journal, and what Bob Howarth and I locked onto was this very crucial point, which is it's not just CO2 that's driving climate change. It's also methane.
We're the first people to really try to cumulatively look at these methane emissions from shale gas. It happens in all these various steps. This is what we think the methane emissions look like. If the leakage rate of the natural gas is of the neighborhood of 3%, then it's as bad for the climate as burning coal. What we were suggesting is that from the time you really start drilling all the way through to final consumer, some percentage, 3.5, 4, 5% of the gas that's produced is emitted unburned to the atmosphere.
The report was the first to contradict the narrative that natural gas from fracking was a climate solution.
The reaction to the paper was disturbing. I had never been a co-author of a paper that created a political firestorm and a scientific firestorm. At first we were pilloried, then we were ignored. I can understand people saying to me, "You're a traitor. You took their money for 25 years. You did their research, and now you're saying stop." Yeah, okay, I am. We had to endure a lot of personal attacks for no good reason. Hurts. Some of those people were good friends and won't talk to me anymore. My colleague Bob Howarth lost research funding.
The pushback from industry and from academics who may or may not have some tie to the industry, though in many cases they did, was strong. The basic discussion was methane emissions couldn't possibly be as high as we said. Well, this is a screenshot of an ad from Google that we took after our paper came out in 2011. The American Natural Gas Alliance, ANGA, paid for a Google ad that was up there for 22 months before they pulled it down. They discover in the eyes of the American Natural Gas Alliance that I'm a fraud. The fossil fuel industry has a history of doing what they need to protect their interests. And you know, they can be ruthless. That's a fact.
The Cornell professors were criticized by other universities, including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. That year, the influential MIT Energy Initiative published a study on the future of natural gas, mainly funded by Aubrey McClendon's Clean Skies Foundation.
The Future Natural Gas study at MIT, I think we were ahead of the curve in talking about the forthcoming shale gas revolution. Methane emissions are a very important greenhouse gas that needs to be addressed. It's just that methane emissions from the oil and gas industry are actually a minority of methane emissions. Fortunately, in contrast to carbon dioxide, methane has a relatively short lifetime in the atmosphere. That doesn't mean one should ignore it. It means that one better eliminate new emissions.
The study promoted gas as a bridge fuel to a lower carbon future. It also criticized the Cornell methane report as unsubstantiated. Ernest Moniz insists industry funding did not influence these conclusions.
The point is, we always believe in transparency, and so that's, yeah.
The funding was part of a wider strategy by the fossil fuel industry. By 2012, oil and gas companies were pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into departments at prestigious academic institutions across America.
The very research centers that we assume to be independent are being funded by the very industry that they're supposed to be critically investigating. This high-profile MIT report trumpets the alleged benefits of methane gas and fracking while downplaying their downsides. It has laid the intellectual groundwork for the reliance on methane gas as a bridge fuel. The problem is, these are, to a letter, the talking points of the fossil fuel industry.
Would you be happy to talk about generally who funded the MIT Energy Initiative, not necessarily that report?
Let's just end the interview, okay? I mean, if you want to paint that as some kind of black spot, well, go ahead. Ridiculous, totally ridiculous. Look at the output. not the input. So, like, it's very disappointing, to be perfectly honest.
Moniz would become Energy Secretary in Barack Obama's second term, where he helped advocate for the natural gas boom. Bolstered by the MIT study, the industry narrative on natural gas took hold in Washington. It became part of President Obama's 2012 State of the Union address, where he unveiled his new energy policy.
There's this great irony of the Obama administration. He comes in promising to be the climate president. He's going to address these issues. He really positions himself as, I'm going after oil and gas. We're really going to rein them in.
The President of the United States.
But by 2012, he's standing up there at a State of the Union talking about how great natural gas is.
We have a supply of natural gas that can last America nearly 100 years. And my administration will take every possible action to safely develop this energy.
When Obama said we had 100 years of natural gas, we panicked because we knew the climate was changing so fast. Instead of helping the public awareness of the harm and what was happening, they just glossed over all of that, and everyone became super excited about this cheap, clean energy that was going to last 100 years. It's maddening.
Because America will develop this resource without putting the health and safety of our citizens at risk.
We didn't take the alternative path of drastically increasing investment in renewables.
Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
It should have happened in the Obama years. And we've exacerbated the climate change problem for 10 years when we could have been diminishing it.
Doing something for the first time, taking advantage of this new resource, you don't always know what you don't know. And over time, what we learned about methane emissions as it relates to natural gas is very, very scary. I think the Obama administration tried to be very conscious of all the implications of the shale revolution. Did it turn out we had it wrong? Absolutely. But at the time, we didn't know that it was wrong, and it's not like we didn't have some of the best scientific minds in the country working on that.
A deadly Southern California wildfire could continue to spread this afternoon.
2012 is shaping up to be one of the worst fire seasons on record.
These kinds of events will become more frequent and probably more intense as a result of human-induced global warming.
By the second term of the Obama administration, his administration was starting to get more serious about climate. You know, if sort of it's climate versus energy production, he's starting to lean more on climate.
President Obama, do the right thing! Do not allow...
There had been mounting public pressure to take on the industry.
There really was a multi-pronged attack on the oil and gas industry, but specifically at this fundamental nature of the oil and gas industry. You've been around for a long time, but your products are problematic. And you've known that they've been problematic. You don't deserve to continue operating in the long term.
In Paris this morning, a potential landmark deal is being revealed on climate change.
Even as he promoted fracking, Obama began a major climate push that led to the Paris Agreement in 2015.
The first global agreement to limit carbon emissions.
196 countries pledged to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
The Paris Agreement is adopted.
I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter, to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
The president began to shift course on methane, introducing new regulations to reduce emissions.
The industry had a very aggressive reaction to the need for regulation. There were a litany of arguments about why it wasn't a good idea to regulate.
Natural gas is a key opportunity to further improve environment. Methane emissions are down in the United States, yet they're pursuing a methane regulatory regime. Why do we need to go out and regulate it even more than it already is?
The industry came out fighting those methane regulations like crazy. They said that they didn't need rules, they could do this voluntarily.
I'm gonna just set up here.
They were marketing natural gas part of the climate solution. So while they were fighting back against these rules, I was just continually out showing how badly they needed some rules, collecting more and more evidence out on the ground, out in the middle of it, of these horrible, horrible emissions. I've been giving comments to EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, for, I don't know, 15 or more years. I went to DC more than once and testified for the Obama rules and let them know what I was seeing on the ground, the evidence that I was collecting, and the whole time the industry was there denying that this was happening. The industry was saying one thing, and I was presenting this evidence that showed that what they were saying was not true. It was never true.
Obama also proposed an ambitious clean power plan to reduce the use of fossil fuels and support renewable energy like solar and wind. Republicans and the oil and gas industry counterattacked.
This Clean Power Plan is all about an anti-fossil fuel strategy to shut down coal generation and fossil fuel generation and the generation of electricity, and you should be very concerned about that. Because what is it going to be replaced with? If it's renewables, wind, the cost of that is going to be insurmountable.
When we first started, people thought we were a little bit nuts, you know, talking about giant windmills, to be honest. So.
Patrick Woodson ran one of America's largest renewable energy firms. For him, Obama's new plan spelled opportunity.
Back when we originally started, there wasn't much technology. We would literally get in the car, drive around, and look for signs of really high winds. So, you know, trees just bent in half. But I've got a particular fondness for this site because this is really where, one of the places where it all began for me. You know, I'd like to leave this planet, you know, better off for the next generation than it was for ours. We were going gangbusters, trying to put as many projects in the ground as possible. I mean, it seemed like the greatest time to be in renewables. Then you started to see the folks that opposed the expansion of clean energy were willing to kind of fight us at all levels.
The false promise of renewable energy in Texas is taking billions of dollars from consumers and taxpayers. More than $13 billion of your money is being diverted to government subsidized.
There started to emerge, you know, national opposition to projects,
negatively impacting property values and the environment. While at the same time,
groups were banding together that were funded in large part by certain members of the oil and gas community. All of a sudden you realize there was a playbook now. They generally would start with the idea that the turbines were too noisy, that there were eyesores. Eventually, if they couldn't get traction with those arguments, they would move on to they're dangerous, they cause disease, there's not a study behind them. Most of there were efforts to kind of derail local permitting. Ultimately, they would also try and put roadblocks into how you built them, create distance barriers or noise barriers or other things to make it harder to put projects together.
When you start seeing massive lobbying efforts backed by fossil fuel interests or conservative think tanks or the Koch brothers, pushing for new laws to roll back renewable energy standards or prevent new clean energy businesses from succeeding, that's a problem.
Legal challenges stalled Obama's Clean Power Plan, and his presidency ended with his climate agenda in peril.
The 45th President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump.
The next president would finish it off.
We will determine the course of America and the world for many, many years to come.
Mr. Trump, who once called global warming a hoax, signed a sweeping executive order this week calling for regulators to rewrite President Obama's climate change policy.
Okay.
It just kind of makes your blood boil when you hear these politicians talk about denying climate change, denying the impacts. We had to go on the defensive again. Trump's vocal opposition to renewables and lack of faith in science and technology were big concerns for a number of us.
There's been a change of direction. The president has sent a very clear message that the last 8 years where we had to choose between jobs and the environment, those days are over. The war on coal ended. The war on fossil fuels ended. All right. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
And you look at the Trump administration, who they brought in, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, former CEO of Exxon, heading up the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, former Attorney General of Oklahoma, who had made a career for himself attacking the EPA and trying to tie it up so that it couldn't be a regulator. Heading up the Department of Energy, Rick Perry, a former governor of Texas. There were a lot of friends of the oil and gas industry that went to Washington, D.C. with the Trump administration.
And how about these Democrats? They want to get rid of oil. They want to get rid of natural gas. They want to go to wind. Oh, darling, I just can't watch the show tonight. The wind, it just stopped blowing.
A reversal of tougher Obama-era standards for rules on greenhouse gas emissions and fuel economy.
A plan that would dramatically weaken pollution limits on coal-fired power plants.
New rules making it easier for oil and gas companies to release methane.
We withdrew from the one-sided, horrible, economically unfair, close your businesses down within 3 years. Don't frack, don't drill. We don't want any energy. The horrible Paris Climate Accord that killed American jobs and shielded foreign polluters.
The Trump administration was very clear what it thought about climate. It pulled out of the Paris Accord. That sent a clear message globally that the United States was not going to play a role as a leader on climate. I mean, those were very good years for the oil and gas industry in the United States.
The United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world.
But at this moment of triumph, the industry faced a new threat. Across America, legal investigations were starting into big oil's long history of climate change misinformation.
I recognize that fossil fuels have literally fueled our economic development in this country.
We're experiencing now this reckoning with that history.
Maura Healey is the Attorney General for Massachusetts.
20th floor. My job as Attorney General is to enforce the laws that are there to protect people. My office has been involved in suits against tobacco companies, suits against the opioid manufacturers, and the story of ExxonMobil is Exhibit A for the worst form of corporate greed that we've seen.
Healey's allegations are built on industry documents, revealing that Exxon scientists had warned their bosses more than 40 years ago that burning fossil fuels would lead to climate change.
And the question I have is why, in the face of that information about how devastating Exxon's products and then practices were going to be on both climate and on its own business model, why they then made the decision to engage in this decades-long effort to mislead and deceive the public. Why?
Commonwealth v. ExxonMobil Corporation.
Anderson,
Thank you, Your Honor, and may it please the court. My name is Justin Anderson. I represent ExxonMobil in this appeal.
ExxonMobil denies the allegations and has tried to have the case dismissed on the grounds that it has a constitutional right to express opinions on climate change.
The idea that the government can be trusted never to bring legal action against someone because they disagree with their speech runs counter to the fundamental concept, the fundamental core principle behind the First Amendment itself. The First Amendment protects us from the government.
When I read the complaint, it doesn't punish your client for his speech. It alleges, this is only an allegation right at this point, that there's been a 40-year fraud.
Your Honor, it does more than that. The alleged misrepresentations are the statements that ExxonMobil has made about its views on climate policy, on energy policy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
The revelations about what Exxon had known about climate change shocked some of the company's employees.
I had no idea that in the 70s there was already major ExxonMobil work on climate change where the internal scientists were warning management about the threat of climate change. And they were actually making eerily accurate predictions about how high the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere would be. Why were they only coming to light through outside channels? Why weren't we hearing about this within the company? I was very upset about seeing that ExxonMobil had put so much money and so much effort into fighting the transition away from fossil fuels.
Da Long Chang left ExxonMobil in 2019.
I left because I felt betrayed by having devoted so much of my career to ExxonMobil on the promise that the company would take on the world's toughest energy challenges and help the transition away from fossil fuels. ExxonMobil is committed to the expansion of oil and gas. That was clear when I was leaving the company.
Well, it's really good to see you, and a lot has happened since we filed our case.
The court rejected ExxonMobil's appeal to dismiss the case on free speech grounds. Healey's team is now gathering evidence and preparing for trial.
Talk to me a little bit about what they're pumping out in terms of methane.
Exxon's marketing natural gas to consumers and others as a climate solution, as being cleaner than other fossil fuels. Meanwhile, it is venting gas into the atmosphere, making climate change worse in a dramatic fashion.
That's just classic misrepresentation and straight-up deception.
That's greenwashing. That's what they're doing. They're making themselves sound green when they are anything but.
Win or lose this case, our job is to tell the story, okay? We will see this through, all the way through in court. It is so important that Exxon be held accountable for its wrongdoing. I'm looking forward to us being able to get in the room with current and former Exxon employees and take their testimony and make them answer questions about what they did, what they know.
You can't lie. There's a difference.
Nobody from ExxonMobil would agree to an interview. The company says the litigation is baseless and without merit, and there is no truth to the suggestion that ExxonMobil ever misled the public or policymakers about climate change. It recently defeated a similar lawsuit brought in New York. But the pressure is continuing in the courts, and now in Congress.
A hearing on Capitol Hill today, the CEOs of the world's biggest oil companies, Shell, Exxon, Chevron, and BP.
A landmark hearing that puts a spotlight on the role fossil fuels have played in accelerating climate change.
Apparent knowledge of it, disinformation, misinformation.
The committee will come to order. This is a historic hearing. For far too long, big oil has escaped accountability for its central role.
In October 2021, top oil executives were questioned under oath about the industry's history of casting doubt on fossil fuel-driven climate change.
We won't solve the climate crisis unless we solve the misinformation crisis.
I now recognize Mr. Khanna, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on the Environment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, let me thank the witnesses. We initiated the investigation to find out what the misinformation was, what these companies knew, when they knew it, and it marks the beginning of scrutiny on them. They've been able to avoid it, duck it, and not have to deal with it. And now they're realizing they're not going to get away with this. What do you have to say to America's children born into a burning world? Find it in yourself today to tell the truth. It will be better for your company's futures, and it will be better for humanity's future.
My name is Darren Woods. I'm the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of ExxonMobil Corporation. ExxonMobil provides an essential component of modern society: affordable, reliable, and abundant energy. ExxonMobil has long recognized that climate change is real and poses serious risks. But there are no easy answers. ExxonMobil is committed to being part of the solution. Our scientists and engineers are applying their expertise to help responsibly meet the world's need for energy, while working to find ways to accelerate the transition to a world with fewer emissions.
Mr. Woods, I want to ask you about some public statements that your predecessor, Lee Raymond, made in 1996 and 97 about the inconclusive nature of the scientific evidence. Were they consistent with the views of Exxon's own scientists?
Yes, Chairwoman, thank you for the question. Our understanding of the science has been aligned with the consensus of the scientific community as far back as 20 years ago, when you referenced our chairman at that time's comments. And as science has evolved and developed, our understanding has evolved and developed, as has our work and position on the statement.
But in the spirit of giving you the chance to turn the page for the company, I assume you would acknowledge that Mr. Raymond's statement was a mistake and the company regrets it, correct?
I think Mr. Raymond's statement was consistent with the science at the time.
I don't even want to argue that, Mr. Woods. I don't even want to argue that. We could go back and forth. I assume now that it's a false statement that the company regrets making it and would acknowledge that, right?
I think the expectation would be that we'd look at that at the time it was said and years ago.
But forget whether it was consistent or not. Can you just acknowledge that it was a mistake and you regret that that statement was out there? Would you say that?
I don't think it's fair to judge something 25 years ago with what we've learned since that time.
Well, I'm disappointed that you're not even willing to say that something is a mistake. You can't make change going forward if you don't accept responsibility for the past. If you're unwilling to even say, yes, we were wrong, we've turned a leaf. If you're continuing to defend the past, knowing that the past was wrong, then you're continuing to engage in misinformation. And you're continuing to perpetrate a corporate culture that is not coming to grips with the climate crisis. That's a failure of leadership.
Unlike major European oil companies, ExxonMobil is not planning to develop solar and wind energy. Instead, it's working on ways to capture rather than emit CO2.
Carbon capture and storage can remove more than 90% of CO2 emissions from these carbon-intensive sectors.
ExxonMobil estimates there will be a $4 trillion annual market for carbon capture and storage by 2050.
It's one of the ways ExxonMobil is advancing climate solutions.
It's not at all surprising that fossil fuel companies would promote ideas and policies that enable the continued use of fossil fuels so that they can sell these fossil fuels.
Charles Harvey is an expert on carbon storage and was a scientific advisor to a carbon storage company.
I got into this field because I wanted to make a contribution to averting climate change. I realized that, in fact, what we were doing was contributing to a false solution. Carbon capture definitely works in that you can capture the carbon and you can inject it deep underground. The issues were whether it's competitive with renewables, because it would be a silly thing to do if you could just build wind farms or solar energy at less cost. And that's the case now. It definitely makes me angry that the fossil fuel companies are using this for their own ends. It is a clever, successful mechanism to sort of slow down and derail the kinds of projects that we need to do. Carbon capture, it's not actually the direction to go, to actually stop climate change or prevent global warming.
A dire warning and a stark reality.
There's really one key message that emerges. We are out of time.
Drive, bro. Atmospheric methane is skyrocketing.
The International Energy Agency says the world needs to stop drilling for oil and gas to save the planet.
The fossil fuel industry no longer tries to deny the reality of human-caused climate change, but it maintains that the world will need oil and gas for years to come.
Nobody has been confronted with what the cost of this energy transition is. There's consequences to actions.
Sharif Souki is a natural gas billionaire and the executive chairman of Tellurian, an American gas export company.
When you're confronted with an energy crisis or climate crisis, you're going to worry first about what's going to happen before the end of the month rather than what's going to happen 30 or 40 years down the road. And you're seeing this materializing itself everywhere. Utility bills are going to double and triple in Europe this winter simply because there's no sufficient amount of energy on a global basis. Do we all agree that there is a climate issue that needs to be addressed? Absolutely. Is this the most important thing for people? No.
Sharif Souki's company, along with ExxonMobil and others, plans to increase exports of American natural gas to the world.
You still need to increase energy by 50% in order to satisfy the aspiration of 90% of the world. %85% of the world's energy is hydrocarbons. There is no realistic way by which you can say, we're going to eliminate hydrocarbons out of the energy mix.
Is there anything you want to say? We got the time.
Renewables as part of the energy mix, it's about 5%. So before it becomes a significant piece, it's going to take decades. It's not going to happen overnight.
According to the International Energy Agency, global greenhouse gas emissions from energy rose to their highest ever level in 2021. America remains the world's leading producer of oil and gas. And production is increasing.
It's quite disturbing to see all of the drilling rigs out here, drilling new wells, more and more and more holes in the ground. We're just going the wrong way. These emissions will impact everyone, all the way around the globe. Because of what's happening in Texas, it's known as a climate bomb. We can have a future, or we can have oil and gas, but we cannot have both.
The latest UN climate report on methane issues a stark warning. Methane levels in the atmosphere have reached record highs, boosted by oil and gas production.
The science that we did has stood the test of time. Now they're saying, hey, methane, really important. We really got to cut back on methane emissions. Told you so. Sorry.
The urgency around methane is it's our biggest knob to get our greenhouse gas impact below the threshold where we'd be in the safe space to avert runaway climate change. If we delay reducing our methane emissions till many decades in the future, by that time it won't matter. By that time the runaway climate change will be at a point where it's like an avalanche, and there's no stopping it.
It's now more than 4 decades since oil industry scientists warned that burning fossil fuels could cause climate catastrophe.
We've lost 40 years in the climate fight. 40 years. We collectively have not done what we need to do. The drought, the famine, the storms, the fires, the devastation, the rising sea levels. So much of it could have been prevented.
It's 25 years since the countries of the world came together to try to solve the problem.
To those who seek to obfuscate and obstruct, we say, we will not allow you to put narrow special interests above the interests of all humankind.
The clock is ticking, and it's been ticking for some time. I'm terrified that we're not going to do nearly enough, fast enough.
The age of fossil fuels is far from over.
We've unleashed the whirlwind. It's not too late, but we lost 2 decades, and now we're playing catch up. What climate change means to me is looking in the eyes of my grandchildren and wondering what kind of hell they're going to pay.
All you need is 1 foot inside the door, and you'll never look back.
The rise and rise of the Norwegian oil industry.
Why would you turn down a well-paid job? Okay, let's do it.
B-14's blowing out.
This is the most oil-producing well in the world. It's too late. We've lost control.
Be careful.
The weather, is it very unusual?
Mayday, mayday.
Norwegian drama, State of Happiness. Coming soon to BBC4 and iPlayer.
Megan, why don't you tell me everything? We had a good life. It was good, and then because of her, it's become this.
A deranged woman kidnapped my baby and nearly killed him.
Agatha Fiefall is committed and very cunning. She'll never stop.
What kind of story are you going to tell about Agatha? One that'll change everything.
The Secret She Keeps starts Saturday at 9:15 on BBC.